Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy, retired Justice of the New York State Supreme Court. Lots of people love MMA and WrestleMania, but I'm a dyed-in-the-wool boxing guy. And I was looking forward back in the early 1980s to about that night between Tommy Hitman Hearns and Roberto Hands of Stone Duran at Madison Square Garden, where I was going to go with my friends. And then I got a phone call. And that phone call was from my dad, who had been retired in Arizona. He was a longshoreman who retired out in Arizona. And he had bad news. He was straight and to the point, which is what he usually was anyway. And he said, Rudy, I got a problem here. I've just been diagnosed with kidney cancer, and they're giving me just a couple of months to live. And wow, that was a shock and an eye-opener. He says, they're talking about the fact that it metastasized. I have a short time, and the best chance I have is chemo, and I don't know whether to have chemo. I got a lot of problems. It's got to be up in Tucson. I live in Nogales on the Mexican border, and 60 miles from Tucson. How am I going to get back and forth? And I just don't know what to do. I'm in trouble, and I need some help. I said, okay, Dad, don't worry. I said, this is Thursday afternoon. I'll be there Saturday morning, and then you and I could put our heads together, and I'll come down to Nogales, and we'll figure out what has to be done. So that night, my father was very, very good. He wasn't excited or anything, and he was cool, calm, and collected, you know. I guess they say class is grace under pressure, and he certainly was graceful under pressure. He must have been under enormous pressure, I can imagine, but he was very relaxed and gracious about it. And he said, "Okay, take your time. Don't worry. I'll be here when you get here. Whenever you get here is good by me." So that night, following his example, I kept my mouth shut, and I didn't want to spoil the evening with my friends. And we saw the fight, and it was a terrific fight, good match. All the other fights were good. We had an enjoyable evening. And the next day, which was a Friday, I canceled everything and I went to see a friend and client of mine, Dr. Ted Atlas in Staten Island. Dr. Ted Atlas was a doctor's doctor. He was a few years older than my dad. I guess he was in his late 70s at the time. And he was that rare combination of intelligence, experience, and sympathy, just a humane character, a wonderful, wonderful man. He was partners in a hospital, physician's hospital, and that's where he made his living. But he worked 14, 16 hours a day treating patients and making house calls. And they were poor and they had no money. He never charged anybody outside the hospital. He never made any money or took any money. In fact, he had an office that would fill up before he got there every afternoon, after making house calls, and before making the evening house calls, he would go to the office. And typically the office would be filled up with 30 or 40 people in the waiting room waiting for him, all poor people. And once what happened was people had gathered before he arrived, and they filled up the waiting room, and along comes a robber with a gun and held up everybody in the office, all the patients, and left with the take. And the cops came. And Dr. Atlas hadn't even been there yet. And the cops came, and when they started, they were called, and they started interviewing and talking to everybody, they tallied up the take. The robbers got, from all those people, less than $50 in total. That's how much money any of the patients had. And they were filling it. The robbers couldn't believe it when they saw Dr. Atlas. Says, how do you do this? He said, I make money at the hospital. I don't charge these people. But he was a good guy. He was also a phenomenal diagnostician. When I say phenomenal, I mean other doctors who had puzzles and couldn't figure out a diagnosis would call him from all over the place. Ted, this is the situation. What do you think this could be? And Dr. Atlas was one of those guys who would go continuously and get keep up with every new trend despite his age. He loved being a doctor. He dedicated his life to saving people and healing the sick. And he went to every lecture and he was up on every technique and everything new and every new twist, which is quite a feat for a man his age or any man his age. Most of them don't do that, and he did. Well, I had a nice talk with Ted. I said, my father's facing chemotherapy. He's got kidney cancer that has metastasized. They're giving him only short months to live. He doesn't know what to do. What do I do, Ted? What's this about chemotherapy? And I said, I want my dad, to die with dignity. He said, well, forget that, Rudy. That's out of your control. He said, we all want that. He said, but there's very little you could do. But this is what you can do. He said, and here's the story with chemotherapy. If your dad can tolerate the chemotherapy and he doesn't have horrible side effects, which today they know how to modify and mitigate, chemotherapy is advisable, even in his case, which is a deadly prognosis. And here's why. With the chemotherapy, what'll happen is your father will keep on in a very normal state for a long time, and then suddenly, I don't know how much time, they say months, whatever it is, even if it's weeks or months, and then suddenly there'll be a steep drop off and he'll die shortly thereafter. If you don't have the chemotherapy, between now and the time he dies, it'll be a gradual, slow decline. And he'll get worse and worse and worse, and he'll suffer along the way. So chemotherapy, if you can manage it, is definitely the way to go because it just makes the journey from here to the end a lot easier for him. And that's good advice. Well, I left Dr. Atlas's office with a heavy heart, but a clear head. I was very, very much relieved to get that advice. I knew what I was doing, and I am, to this day, he passed away, and I am forever indebted to his memory. And he did me a great, great service in helping me to address that problem with my dad. So all my questions had been answered. So I flew to Tucson that Saturday morning and rented a car to drive 60 miles south, right to the Mexican border, Nogales, which is where my dad had retired 25 years earlier. And he was on the edge of town in Nogales. And on the way down, I was reminiscing about my father, and I had all these memories of my dad when I was a little kid and all the nice things, the nice experiences that we had together. And it brought back very, very many happy memories. I thought about my dad, and he was an avid shooter. He loved guns. He was an expert in every weapon they could find in the Army. He was a great marksman. He did his own. He had his own ammunition he filled, and he had a little shooting range in his back because he lived out in the desert and facing 4 different mountain ranges right out of his bedroom. And it was in the high desert, right on the Mexican border, and he could shoot out there, and he had his own little range. And he loved living out there. And I asked him, why did he go to Arizona? And he said, after all those years in my life, I never wanted to face another cold, damp day on the Brooklyn docks. He said, and I love the warmth and the heat here in Arizona. And he would get a kick out of hanging up his clothes on a clothesline. And he would start at one end of the clothesline and go to the end of the clothesline and hang up all the clothes and immediately go back to the beginning of the clothesline and take the clothes down because they were already dried in about 5 minutes in the hot, dry heat out there, And they never think anything is hot out there until it's about 115 degrees because it's dry heat, but it's hot. But my father loved it, and he enjoyed it, and he was in the catbird seat. He just enjoyed it. Years earlier, he had cancer before that. He had oral cancer, and I thought about that, and I thought about his youth. In his youth, he had pneumonia 5 times when pneumonia was deadly. He had tuberculosis. He spent years up in the Adirondacks, staying out of the city and fighting the tuberculosis. And any doctor who examined him or x-rayed his lungs without knowing his past got alarmed because his lungs were so scarred they looked like a road map. The radiology showed up as almost like a road map with all the different lines on his lungs. And he contracted 10 years before oral cancer. The dentist noticed it, sent him to an oral surgeon, a guy named Dr. Don Duncan, who was a phenomenal guy, a graduate of Johns Hopkins, and a Green Beret in the Special Forces. He was a doctor in the Special Forces. And he was a fabulous guy. And he did oral surgery on my dad, cut out part of his tongue, jaw, neck. And my father was such a good patient, and he recuperated so well that Dr. Duncan used his case study as a subject of many, many lectures that he gave. And Don Duncan is a brilliant guy, and he's today retired in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He's just a wonderful, wonderful guy, brilliant doctor. And he loved my dad. So I arrive in Nogales, and my father was happy to see me. He got up out of bed to greet me, and I was surprised that he looked very well rested, and he looked good. He looked cool, calm, and collected. And which was typical of him. And he was always a good dresser. Even in his pajamas, he looked good. He was very meticulous in how he dressed. And he said, I'm glad you're here, and we'll talk. So he said, we'll talk later. I got settled. I got unpacked, and dinner came, and we had dinner and watched TV, and then we watched the weather report, which my father would watch every night on the nightly news, looking for bad weather in New York and all the other places like Detroit and Chicago and Philadelphia, so that he could feel reassured that he made the right move to live in good old warm Arizona. He took personal satisfaction from the weather broadcast every night, which is kind of funny. It was just a nice thing to see. And again, when I got there, my dad, I found him very calm. He told me, he says, I'm not afraid to die. He says, I don't worry about that. He said, we're all going to die. He said, everybody's got to do that. And I think he was calm. One of the reasons why, because he had faced that before with pneumonia. They thought they had written him off 5 times. I think the last time was the sulfur drug that saved him, the brand new sulfur drug in the late 1940s. And my mother nursed him back all of those times. And I guess he was used to it. And but he was glad to be alive, and he knew he had survived a long life, and he was psychologically in good shape. But he was worried. So we finally sat down, and we shot the breeze, as he would call it. And he told me his concerns. He said, look, I'm worried about this stuff. He said, I don't know what to do. I have to go up. They want me to do chemo up in Tucson. It's 60 miles away. Who's going to drive me? Who's going to drive me back? I don't even know if I want to do it. Does it pay or anything else? And I started to talk to him, and I explained to him what Ted Atlas had told me about it. And I said, Dad, this is the way to handle it. Let's look into it this way. And I'll go tomorrow, or Monday morning, actually. Tomorrow at that time that was Saturday night. It was going to be Sunday. I said, on Monday morning, I said, we'll spend the day together. We'll have a nice day. And on Monday morning, I'll go up to Tucson and let me see what the arrangements are that I can make. And I talked to Dr. Duncan, who knew every doctor in town and all the situation, and was so friendly and so helpful. And my father looked at me and he said, I'm really glad you came here first. He said, I know your brothers love me like you love me, and I know all of you, they and you would lay down their lives for me. He said, but you're here first, and you're a lawyer. He said, and lawyers solve problems for people. That's what lawyers do. They solve people's problems, and I've got big problems here. And I can't tell you how relieved I am that you're here and what a load you've taken off my shoulders, because you can do it, and you're a lawyer. And that was startling to me, because I had been practicing at that point for about 10 years, and I had lost track of why I had become a lawyer. You get tied up in cases and situations and making money and paying the rent and doing whatever you can, and you lose sight of your origins and the basic reasons, the fundamental reasons that brought you to whatever stage in life you were at. And here I was, and my father opened my eyes. Here was a guy that I regarded as a little boy as Superman, as all kids do. They think their parents are super people, superheroes. My dad and my mom, especially your dad. And I can't tell you how many times he must have cleaned my diapers and blew my nose and fed me and walked me and did everything I'm supposed to do, read me stories from the funny papers and everything else. and made me into a reader because he really loved to read, and he passed that on to me by reading me just from the funny papers on Sundays, sitting on his lap. And to think that at this point in time, he needed my help, and and I had the ability, because I was a lawyer, to help him, was a startling realization. I mean, he was Superman, and now Superman needs me. Well, Monday morning came, and I was dressing up, and my father was in bed watching me dress because I had unpacked and I was using his closet in his bedroom, in that nice bedroom looking out at the 4 mountain ranges. And I had a nice combination I had put together. I had a pair of burgundy Italian loafers, and with a matching burgundy belt. I had brown slacks, light brown slacks, with a brown salt and pepper tweed jacket, or herringbone, I'm not so sure. But it was a brown and tan tweed jacket, a pink dress shirt, and a maroon tie. And my father looked at me and he said, "That's some nice combination." And I said, "Well, I'm glad you like it." He said, "Yeah." He says, "I like it a lot." I said, "Well, I had a good teacher." And I saw my father beaming, because my father was the sharpest guy. He dressed like a movie star no matter what. He went to work on the docks and his jeans were pressed. That's the kind of a guy he was. His shoes were always spit-shined. His nails were clean and manicured. He did them himself. He was always very, very spot on. And to think that I gave him credit, for the way I looked. I said, I look this way because of your example. And he just beamed with pride, and that was a wonderful thing. So push comes to shove, and I went up to Arizona, and I made all the arrangements with Dr. Duncan and his help and everything else. I got everything arranged, and we set everything up. My brothers and my Uncle Jimmy, who is my father's only brother, divided up the next weeks evenly. We did a rotating shift. Each of us took a turn. And only a month later, my father passed away. And he died with dignity. He died in bed peacefully and just closed his eyes. And he was out looking at those 4 mountain ranges that he loved so much. And he died in the arms. It turns out it was my Uncle Jimmy was there, his brother. And Uncle Jimmy was holding his hand when my father passed on. And I then realized, again, thanks to my dad, I got straightened out, and I realized why I first became a lawyer. And I never forgot. And as one client once said, doctors, they take care of your body and they heal the sick. And the clergy, they take care of your soul and they heal your spirit. But lawyers, they take care of your problems and your troubles, and they heal your mind. And it's a great power, and I never forgot that. And it's served me well to keep that in mind ever since my father died. I've never forgotten why I became a lawyer. It was very simply just to help people. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.